coming up next on the politics of politics.
Since I was kicked out of the office in 2017 after 17 years.
They didn't like what you were saying.
Well, no, I think it was time to go.
Sure. Ordinary South Africans that are about to go to vote this year and are unemployed, they're still living in very dangerous communities. There's situations where there's no water. We still have a very poor education system, and I'm going to ask you about that because the government says it's been a success, and we are...
Who says that?
That's what the minister said, and I'm going to ask you about that.
Let me drink some water.
Absolutely.
To be sure that I'm still sober.
And if you think about where we were 25 years back to where we are now, you've made a point and you've made an argument many times that we have lost all the gains that we have made in democracy. Why do you say that?
Well, I say so because the numbers say so. It's not even me saying that. The fundamental philosophy of free market is things will gravitate towards equilibrium. And you should leave everything to the market so that they will gravitate towards equilibrium. Year in, year out, we are told that things will ultimately gravitate towards equilibrium.
Reforms.
That's a swear word. I don't know what the reforms are about.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Neo Lekgabo, and welcome to the Politics of Politics. In this show, we delve into the complexities of South African politics and we guide you all through it. We do that by bringing in guests and leaders whose ideas we believe can shape the future of our nation. And today, we've got such leader, Dr Pali Lehohla, who is the former Statistician General of South Africa. But before we speak to Dr Lehohla, here is my political agenda. My political agenda is a segment of the show where I share my thoughts with you about something that I've picked up in the media or a thought that I had. And today, in today's political agenda, I want to talk about a pimp named Slickback. For those that understand Boondocks and those that don't, I'll tell you who the pimp named Slickback was. He's a fictitious cartoon character, Black American. He's a pimp. He wears a purple suit and he wears a hat. Now, you may be wondering, what does that have to do with politics? It's got everything to do with politics. He's got a friend. His friend is Tom. Tom has a problem because the wife doesn't listen to him. So Tom goes to the pimp named Slickback and says, "Pimp named Slickback, tell me, how do I get my wife to listen to me?" And the answer is very intriguing. He says, "Well, you must beat up your wife. Then he'll listen to you." Tom is not sure about this thing. And he says to pimps named Slickback, "But how do you deal with all the sex workers that are in your employ?" The pimp says, "Oh no, I'll show you what I do. I take them, I assault them, I beat them until they bleed. And when they bleed and they're begging for mercy, I put them in the bath and give them painkillers. They will be so grateful that I give them painkillers that they will forget I'm the one who caused the pain in the first place." And that pimp named Slickback is the government of the day. Where you look at where we are now as a nation, where basically, because we destroyed your jobs, we will give you grants. You will be so grateful for the grants that you will forget that we're the ones that put you in the street in the first place. We will give you NSFAS money. You will be so grateful for the NSFAS money that you will forget that we're the one that stole the money from the coffers and did not do what we promised you, which was free education. Oh, and this is even more amazing. We will give you land to build your own shack. You'll be so grateful for the land that you forgot that we're the one that did not build the houses for you in the first place. And we are the ones that destroyed your economy. Now, I know that this comes out a little bit harsh, but I just want South Africans to really, really think about who they're going to vote for in the next elections. And when they evaluate the political parties and look at what they are grateful for, please be careful that we do not behave like the sex worker who was owned by a pimp named Slickback. And next up, Pali Lehohla. As promised, we are in the studio with Dr Pali Lehohla, the former Statistician General of South Africa. I'm quite excited to get into this conversation with him. As I always say to people when he's not listening, that he's one of the very few people in this country who understands this country by numbers. But before we get into the interview, please have a look at the next insert that tells you about the man.
Ladies and gentlemen, as South Africa's Statistician General for the past 15 years, Mr. Lehohla has made his mark as skilled innovator in his field of expertise, both locally and internationally.
Pali Lehohla is the former Statistician General of South Africa and former head of Statistics South Africa. Since leaving office, Dr. Lehohla consults on research, strategy, and statistical development and statistical programs, especially those related to census.
The world had 2.6 billion people in 1950.
Dr. Lehohla held a number of positions during his tenure as a Statistician General. He served as co-chair of Paris 21 and as a chair of the UN Statistics Commission. He was the founding chair of the Statistics Commission of Africa and chaired the African Symposium for Statistical Development. He was vice president of the International Statistic Institute and a sponsor of the Young African Statistician Movement. He remains on the independent advisory panel to the UN Secretary General on the health of mothers, adolescents, and children.
Well done. Wonderful to have you here.
At EMA, Dr. Lehohla is Director of Stakeholder Management.
Dr. Lehohla, welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And so tell me, what have you been up to professionally? Man.
Yes, I mean,
we hear your voice and we see your articles.
Since I was kicked out of the office in 2017 after 17 years.
They didn't like what you were saying.
Well, no, I think it was time to go.
Sure.
17 years in an organization that you grew from 600 staff to 3,500.
Sure.
Distributed in 54 offices across the country.
Wow.
Gathering information of the nation. I mean, it was absolutely a privilege. So since I've been out of there, I've been doing quite a lot of work in different continents, in the continent of Africa, on the statistics legislation, for instance, on organization, on information technology, because the statistics use a lot of information technology.
Yes.
By the way, they are the first people, the statisticians, to work on computers.
Oh, really? I thought it was military.
Not really. I mean, at universities, basically mathematicians and statisticians that really work on computers.
I see.
Of course, with time, then the financiers come in and then they move money around.
Sure.
But at the heart of it is a statistical and mathematical conception.
Yeah.
So I've been doing work in Vanuatu to deal with the statistical legislation. I was in Nigeria in a state, Kaduna. There we are looking at the strategy for the development of statistics for the state.
Yes.
More recently, I've been in Lesotho working on the legislation, statistical legislation.
Nice.
Well, I've been working with the African Development Bank on the data innovation labs. You know, the whole innovation that has come by. I was a member of the 25 team person that Ban Ki-moon appointed to look at data revolution and the meaning of data revolution. So, this work that I'm doing with the ADB on data innovation labs, I mean, what it reminds me of is when we were growing up. In fact, when I was at university, I did work on farmers' risk perceptions and risk avoidance strategy. That was way back in 1978. And what we're looking at then were interviewing households and finding out what are the risks, what are the perceptions, how do they mitigate these risks. One of the things that was very intriguing, particularly when one reflects in the context of information technologies, when you look at migratory labor, the wife is out there, the husband is on the mines.
Yes, a different side of town.
Yes, and then they have to decide at home when to plant and what to plant and when to plow and so on and so on. Those decisions have to be communicated by letter, not even by telegram. By letter that comes to the mine, to a miner who might even be illiterate, somebody has to interpret, and then he has to write back to the wife. By that time, the rain is gone. So, what's the cause?
Of course.
So now is information technology and the phones.
Yes.
You know, you call and say, send a WhatsApp. The rains are forming. What should we do? What should we plant? And the decisions can be instantaneous. Well, have we gotten the efficiencies and effectiveness? One still wonders because there are still so many poor people.
No,
With these kind of abilities that we have, you don't expect people to be poor.
Yeah. No, but look, I mean, you know, and the theme of poor people is very central to us here as a country, and I think as a continent, and to a large extent the world. But our focus, I think I want it to be on South Africa. We're sitting 30 years into democracy. We are one of the most, if not the most unequal society in the world. And if you think about where we were 25 years back to where we are now, you've made a point and you've made an argument many times that we have lost all the gains that we have made in democracy. Why do you say that?
Well, I say so because the numbers say so. It's not even me saying that. It's the numbers saying so. And having had the privilege of, running numbers in the country, at least at the helm for 17 years, but in the institution for 34 years. So I come with almost half of my life in the statistics institution. The numbers come in many forms. I mean, you count for the nation in many ways, in different ways. You measure the economy, you measure the population, you measure everything about everything in the country. And the numbers come to only one conclusion at this point, that while democracy has been inclusive in terms of free choice of electing, the economy has not been inclusive. The education system has not been inclusive. And education is a driver of economy.
Yes.
I mean, without education, you can't actually go anywhere.
Yes.
Crime, you have to look at 50 million people used to travel on our trains. That number was about 2 million by 2019.
One could argue that is because we have there's been dispersed across other modes of transport.
No, it's not. It's not. That's not the reason. It's that the rail lines had been destroyed, so there hasn't been a possibility of moving them on that space. So all these things have brought the economy of South Africa on its knees, and with that, by the way, the economy is in the interest of the people. That's what happens. So that's where we are. Now we are hardly growing at 1% in the country.
Yeah. And it's been like that for a while now. We have not been growing for a while.
If you look at the gross fixed capital formation, which is basically how much investment in real economy is happening, that has been on its knees since about 2014, 2015. It's been as flat as it could ever be. And without investment in gross fixed capital formation at the rate of about 15% per annum or 20% per annum, which was what happened between 2002 and 2008. And that's when we started seeing the country flirting with about 6% growth. I mean, the country was shocked at that time. And
I remember very well.
The unemployment rate dropped from 31% to 25%, which was still high, but it continuously dropped in that period. And there was probably some promise that those kinds of things could happen. So this, at the moment, is like a wild, long-lost dream. Something that is unimagined in South Africa.
Well, if we are to believe what the politicians are saying, this is what the politicians are saying. Or maybe let me rather be narrow in my question. This is what the governing party is saying. One, we have failed because we're still living under the legacy of apartheid, so it is not them. Two, is because there's clever blacks who are criticizing them, and as a result, those clever blacks are the ones that are in white pockets. So therefore, it is what they are saying is not true, and it is not them. Thirdly, is because the business is sitting with a lot of cash that they're not reinvesting into the economy, especially banks, and from that perspective, they cannot grow. And lastly, the people do not have the land, and the Reserve Bank of South Africa is not nationalized enough to stimulate growth, which is a change of a mandate, and serve the people of South Africa. So from that perspective, they have done all they can, but they've just been sabotaged by everybody else.
You are governing and you are sabotaged.
That is what it is.
Then you are not governing. When you are there and having political power, you use parliament to change things in the favor of what you want to do. And I think in good part, they haven't done that. Or rather, in totally, they haven't done that. Because that's the power they have. Bolivia, for instance, in 2005, actually changed the face of Bolivia by changing the policies. And 2024 now, Bolivia is one of the fastest growing economies in Latin America through Morales and his successor, who is now 2 years in power. And he has adopted a set of policies that enable Bolivia to grow. Of course, the excuses that they are making cannot be true. They are in power, by the way.
Yes.
And that political power has to be deployed in policies.
Well, I mean, the argument is that, they are not really in power. There's still a white monopoly capital which is sitting in Stellenbosch, which is dictating the terms.
Well, then they are not in power. And therefore, they have to step down if that's the situation.
Yeah.
Because the laws of the country say that the apex is that political power that sits with the president and his executive and sits with the triangle of the parliament and the judiciary.
Yes.
And all these things can be done legitimately through those institutions. And nothing stops them from changing the policies that they have adopted. So the question is, these are silly excuses, by the way. A good number of them are just silly excuses. Because between 2002 and 2008, this country grew at 4 to 5% per annum. Many will argue that it was the World Cup. No, it wasn't the World Cup.
Well,
Many will argue.
Also during that time, many will say it was jobless growth.
No. Well, unemployment dropped from 30% to 25% and went flattened with about 22%.
Okay.
The unemployment was still high.
Sure.
It wasn't a jobless growth.
Okay.
There was employment that occurred in that period. Okay. What needed to happen was sustained policies that were there. Many will argue that China was thirsty for the minerals and South Africa was providing those minerals.
Yes.
The point is, China is still thirsty for minerals.
Yes.
And the world is still thirsty for minerals.
Yes.
What we have to go and inspect in that period is what were the policies that enabled that. They may not have been very deliberate, those policies, in doing so, but they created this moment of hope for the country. And it is going back to those that is necessary. In fact, they happened in spite of the private sector being on strike at that time.
Yes.
So you can imagine if the private sector came to the party and sustained that momentum, then And the private sector was not very trusting at the time. But what was important, and what is important, is to go back and interrogate those policies that made sure that gross fixed capital formation was coming at double digit.
Yes.
Credit extension was coming at double digit.
Yes.
There might be mistakes in that period, of course, like the deindustrialization, where clothing and all these other firms that we used to have, the metal coming in instead of ISCO, and all those things certainly have to be relooked, because in part they led to the deindustrialization. And we are not looking at that period, interrogating it well enough to see what best can we do now.
Well, but then, and that makes sense, right? But then the ordinary South Africans that are about to go to vote this year and are unemployed, they're still living in very dangerous communities. There's situations where there's no water. We still have a very poor education system, and I'm going to ask you about that, because the government says it's been a success, and we are...
Who says that?
That's what the minister said, and I'm going to ask you about that.
Let me drink some water.
Absolutely.
To be sure that I'm still sober.
So the ordinary South African is sitting out there and is saying, look, we need, something needs to give. When you listen to political parties that are speaking now, both the old and the new, and everyone talks about how they're going to grow the economy and how they're going to change the face of this country, is there anyone that you listen to as they speak and say, I think from an economic policy standpoint or from a planning standpoint, I think he's onto something? Without promoting any political party.
It's very difficult to say. But I listened to Songeso.
Yes.
I thought I'm hearing something there.
Okay.
But it's not very different from the talk around the RDP.
Sure.
But he certainly is back in the RDP space.
Which was 94 to 99.
Yes. Well, the RDP itself, its promise.
Its promise, okay.
Yes,
So
not its implementation. Its implementation became something else, which was gear, which really brought a different perspective. So I haven't heard many, but he launched his manifesto recently. I think he actually, particularly when it came to the issue of how you use your pensions, that you can use pensions to get and solve all these other problems, because that's the kind of money you need to kickstart the economy and reindustrialize and so on. For the ruling party, borrowing from the IMF and borrowing all these monies, I don't think that makes sense. It's not even necessary.
That we are stealing at the same time.
Yes, it's not necessary. So looking at the policies that they've put on the table of privatization, massive privatization, I mean, they've created a crisis of energy, a crisis of logistics, and therefore created conditions for poverty. And they think that they can resolve those problems by privatization. It's not going to happen. It can't. The private sector will choose the winners and will leave everybody else. I mean, look at solar panels now. Only those who have money can buy these solar panels from outside the country, after all. Therefore, draining the foreign exchange. I mean, what kind of policy coherence is that? And the rest cannot afford these solar panels. They are not manufactured here.
But then if the government does not have proven not to have capacity to deliver anything to the populace still, nature doesn't allow a vacuum. The population still needs to function. So the private sector becomes the only savior then.
No. I'm not suggesting that the private sector should not come in. But the government has to provide a framework, not only a framework, but an interventionist framework through which it can leverage economic development. You see, the private sector, the private sector and the way they run the economy is based on market fundamentalism, free market. From Milton Friedman and the World Bank and so on. So the fundamental philosophy of free market is things will gravitate towards equilibrium. And you should leave everything to the market so that they will gravitate towards equilibrium. Year in, year out, we are told that things will ultimately gravitate towards equilibrium.
Reforms.
That's a swear word. I don't know what the reforms are about. But you see, the problem is we have 35% unemployment. And we still say the private sector, everything will gravitate towards equilibrium. We don't have significant intervention in education. And we still think that things will gravitate. So give schools to the private sector so that they can actually educate and things will gravitate towards equilibrium. So this is a fundamental flaw in the policy space, the policy framework that we have.
You comment a lot on education, and you are not happy with the PR. And you know, I'm calling it PR because you're not happy with the PR that's coming out of the Department of Education. That basically says that, you know, they're doing well.
I mean, you know, I wish their children were attending these schools that return such low and deplorable marks. Then I think I would understand that probably they share in the pain that you see in the streets. Well, I think it's even insulting to PR because, of course, there has to be PR.
Sure.
There has to be a way in which you present yourself to the public.
Sure.
There has to be a way in which propaganda functions. And propaganda, I use it in the context of propagating ideas.
Sure.
You have to propagate things.
Sure. But
they've given the name propaganda a bad name and the PR a bad name. You know, there are 1.1 million children born in South Africa every year.
Okay.
There are about 900,000 born, around 2,000 a year, and that number has increased to about 1.1 million.
2K.
Yes, yes. I mean, and if you take those number of children, 1.1 million every year born, some will die, of course.
Sure.
But you still have a substantial number of a million who will go forward in life and go and be expected to write matric.
Yes.
Of that number, there are only 250,000 year in, year out to date that will pass with a decent pass that will take them anywhere in life. Of course, others, so if the universities, I'm not saying that you should go to university only when you have got that kind of pass. You can go into very many fields.
Yes.
But when we have only 250,000 that pass decently, then it's a serious problem. It means that 750,000 we lose to the vagaries of
So what are you doing? Are you looking at you're taking the 80% pass rate and you're distilling into the quality thereof?
No, I don't use the denominator as those who wrote.
Okay.
I use the denominator as those who survived from birth to a matric age.
So you're talking 1.1 million vis-a-vis 2,000. Sorry, 250,000.
250,000.
Yes.
Of course, there are those who will pass and then
but,
and go to technicals and so on. Sure. I'll come and talk about technicals later. And I'm making this distinction with the university for specific reasons because that I'll talk to, and then I'll talk to technicals. Okay. So we are losing this. If you adjust the pass rate for cohorts that were born per year going forward, then you'll see that 80% is false. They're talking probably about 40%, close to 30%. Because in that 8%, you have people who are in their past matric age.
Yes.
Because we have up to 24 years, or up to those who are 24 years who are in there. And we use those as the denominator of those that write.
Yes.
and we don't adjust them for their own cohort. So if we were to strictly talk to those who are up to 18 years old,
Yes.
we have a very deplorable situation. And if we add then those who are 24 and so on, it even pulls the average pass mark even lower. So we will be talking about 35% pass rate. Because these people are still there. They appear in the unemployed numbers,
Yes.
who constitute 75% of the unemployed population.
Correct.
Worse still, in 2008, the number of people who were employed that were aged 15 to 34 were 1.6 million plus 4.8 million. That will give you about 6 point something million.
Yeah, I did history.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
So that was the number employed in 2008.
Yes.
You come to 2022 or 2023 now, and that trend started in 2018, so we cannot confuse it as a COVID issue.
Sure.
Now, only 1 million are employed out of the 1.6 million.
Within that cohort of
15 to 24.
Yes.
And then 25 to 34, only 4,400,000 are employed compared to the 4,800,000 that were employed. So over a period of almost 14, 16 years,
we've gone
the
backwards.
number of people in a growing population have fallen lower than in 2008. The only numbers that are growing are those who are 35 and above. Now, if you're a young person sitting there and watching this, what future do you think you are seeing? There's no future.
No, it is
And then
heartbreaking.
when people say that the metric is good, what good when these people cannot even find jobs?
Absolutely.
Now, let me come to the university.
Yes.
The fault line in the universities, I mean, I did work on this, I looked at the numbers. As far as the university graduates are concerned, up to the year about 2013, those people's unemployment was 5%,
Okay.
compared to already an unemployment rate that was close to matric unemployment for people who had gone into technicons.
Yes.
And when you start analyzing that data, that decline in employment of the people who are AMBACH started from a cohort that started going into AMBACH in 1996. Before then, the AMBACHs had a very low rate of unemployment.
Unemployment.
Yes.
Yes.
So both the technical schools that were destroyed, the education and everything, led to this. Only at the university level where there was no disruption of education and there were no new universities, that cohort still got jobs. The cohorts of the technicals got less employed.
Yes.
So when you start thinking about these things and analyzing, you realize
There's nothing to celebrate.
there's nothing to celebrate here.
Yeah. Well, the Premier of Gauteng, Panyaza Lesufi, has said that part of the problem, well, the biggest problem, is that the IEB as well as the national certificate students are not writing the same exam, and we must either level down or level up, but basically standardize the paper.
I agree with Lesufi. We wrote an equivalent of IEB in Lesotho, Cambridge Overseas School Certificate with Malaysia, Singapore,
Yes.
UK, and all the colonies that were British.
Yes.
And our papers went on a donkey back into those mountains, and we wrote those exams. And
Yes.
so there's nothing magical. And we actually have to write the same. There's no reason why we don't standardize on a better standard. If ID is better, so be it, and I suspect it's marked at the Cambridge Overseas School Certificate. But having said that, the issue is not so much about the exam that gets written, because those who have written the other still perform well when they get to university anyway.
Correct.
So the question is, who are the people that teach these children?
Please tell the story of Monala.
The
I like that story. The story of
yes. Molana.
Molana, sorry, not Molana. Please tell the story of Molana.
You see, what is happening here in what the minister and the president are saying?
Yes.
They are talking to those who are searching for their coin where there is light.
Yes.
Molana, you see, is seen by his friend frantically looking for something desperately. And his friend asks, Molana, what's wrong? You are looking for something? Molana says, yes, I'm looking for my coin. I lost it. The friend asks him, where did you lose it? Molana said, I don't know where I lost it. So he asks, why do you are looking for it here? And he says, well, that's where there is light. So the matric results are about where there is light.
Yes.
So everybody who has been literally left in the dark, as we have been left in the dark since load shedding,
Literally.
are left on their own devices.
Yes.
And they can only talk to these ones who are having light. So the 1.1 million minus those who wrote adjusted for their age, because this has to be adjusted for their age,
Yes.
have been left out. They are in the dark.
Yes.
They are not part of the data
Yes.
that is shown. They only show again in the dark because they end up unemployed.
Unemployed, absolutely.
That's the Molana featured situation that we have here.
I like that story.
Yes.
But then going into, thinking about the dark and talking about load shedding, by your estimation, is this thing solvable? And everyone is giving their numbers. The Minister of Electricity said by next year he thinks he would have sorted it out. I've had political parties saying if we get elected into power in our first term of 5 years, we're going to sort this thing out. And comment on Transnet as well. And share with us, if you know, some numbers around what Transnet was doing back in the day versus what kind of like numbers they're doing now. What's your sense about this load shedding thing? What do you think is at the heart of it? And what do you think should be the solution?
You see, South Africa likes to be a poster boy for everyone in the world. And that poster boy's desire, it's very attractive, when you go to New York or Washington and these boys in Washington, IMF and World Bank dine you and praise you. You feel like you are floating over water, and they say, well, that is why the British Parliament asked, when is South Africa working on this load shedding matter? Or not load shedding matter, but on closure of the coal
plants.
That was discussed in the Parliament of the UK.
I didn't know that.
Yes. There is a Hansard in the UK that said, when are these people doing this thing? So they said, where is our poster boy who should demonstrate to the world so that this whole thing of coal can go? Well, I'm not suggesting that coal is the best thing, because people who stay in those places suffer from TB, lung diseases and everything, which is very bad, for them. And something has to be done about that. But when it is done for climate, and those people are actually forgotten, ages and ages, generational disadvantage has happened in those communities. When we think about just must be about those people. Not even before we talk about climate. Because the issue of climate, whether it's this year or next year, it really doesn't matter. But for those people, something has to be done. Now, here's the poster boy told to go and close down Komati. And Komati gets shot. Shortly after that, the poster boy has to go to Mozambique and ask for 125 megawatts, and then go to Botswana to see whether they can give him megawatts. Komati was producing 1,000 megawatts, which is 1 unit or 2 units of load shedding. It was closed down. The people around that area are facing disaster. Where is empathy? Where is a sense of, we are operating as though there is no education.
Accountability.
Well, even accounting. Because you should have understood that we have to be empathetic to that society. And the evidence that should come out of that must be the one that is robust for your actions. And that should be dealt with in terms of education. So, what have we got now? Children go and write metric without electricity. Farms run without electricity. Then the arguments are made for the renewables that, oh yes, firms have adjusted to this. They spend 5 billion and will resolve this thing. At the shopping malls, the solar panels only work for lights, not for cooling.
Yes.
The meats and everything gets thrown away each time these things fall. Now, that's one thing. Second, these things are important, by the way. So you should go and read Bhagwati in Miserizing Growth. The strategies are just simply immiserizing. You don't need to rush to close the fire-powered stations.
But we had load shedding before even Komati was closed.
Well, that ran in 2014. It wasn't as bad. I mean, it was very limited. And in 2007, it was very limited.
Well, you had state capture in between.
Yes, there have been a lot of wrong things that have happened. But the strategy of closing the power stations, in fact, when this started in 2007, a number of power stations were brought online, including, that were mothballed, including Komati.
Yes.
Yes. So all those that have been closed have to be brought online so that industry can function. And then we can deal so that there is security of energy as we deal with the issues of climate change. What has Europe done? Germany, when they realized that they were in trouble, they even went and banned very low-grade coal.
Yes.
That even worsens the system.
Yes.
I'm not saying that we should go and use coal all the time.
Yes.
But I'm just simply saying we really are on a path that is anti-development.
Do you think you'll get a WhatsApp one day from the president asking you to come and be the Minister of Economic Development?
No, I've done my bit in society, and I can't be institutionalized.
But if your country needs you, your country needs you.
No, I can't be institutionalized. The problem with being institutionalized is that you get captured.
Yes.
And you don't want to be...
You must see what your boss wants to hear.
You don't want to be captured. The ideas cannot be captured. So people who have ears can hear and use the ideas. Don't personalize the ideas.
Yes, but the problem is that, if we interview a lot of people in the show, and every time, and we get this feedback when people come out of the show and have watched the episodes and they're like, geez, these kinds of ideas have to find way into the mainstream media, number one, but also into the corridors of power. And I think they do find their way there, but there's something that happens where they find their way there, but they nothing happens. I mean, we've had Ibrahim Patel for about 8-9 years now, right? At which point do you say, hey, my guy, you have tried, but
No, the economic policies are you see, here is the point. Our economic policies have to deal with a number of things as are done in different countries. Bolivia being the most recent, Cuba being another. Rwanda is another example of countries that are, Egypt is another. And for Egypt, Nigeria is another example where you can see Dangote uses patriotic capital to actually say, we cannot let oil go on like this in Nigeria.
Yeah, he's building a refinery.
Yes, a refinery and saying, here is what I'm doing for this country.
Yes.
It's patriotic capital.
Yes.
And in that, he corrects the situation of oil leaving Nigeria without being refined. How many of our minerals are leaving South Africa without anything happening to them? So the issue is this. This is what Bolivia has done. You have to really go and
I'll
read
check it
this
out.
fascinating story
I'll
by
check it out.
Morales. He gets appointed, he goes into an election in 2004. In 2005, he steps in, he says, I'll have to solve a number of things here. I'll nationalize the minerals, oil, and gas. And out of this, I'll sponsor the development of Bolivia. He got a lot of flack from all countries.
Yes.
He stuck to his guns
Yes.
and used those to develop Bolivia. If you look at the indicators of Bolivia, unemployment, growth, and everything, it surpasses all the countries of Latin America. And Argentina has gone backwards now with the new president. Now, it is the economic policies such as those of Bolivia where he said, there's poverty here, there's illiteracy here, these are the things I have to tackle. Exactly the same things that we suffer here in South Africa. They cannot be tackled by only tax money. Tax money is too little.
Would you support the policy of nationalization?
You need to nationalize a number of the things that we have, particularly the new minerals for the future. What are they called? The rare earth.
Yes.
You need to nationalize those and use them to finance education. You need to nationalize those to actually make sure South Africans have water and have electricity.
Can you explain nationalization in a way that an average me can understand it? Because nationalization so far, and most of the people would associate it with EFF as a policy. And sometimes we may use the same term, but referring to
a number of different things.
You see, what is your definition of it?
You need a strategic lever. In Norway, oil is nationalized. They are social democrats. They use that oil to finance education, to finance health, to finance social security. Those are strategic assets that you have to deploy to manage this. And most of the European countries use that social democratic.
But they don't steal that money as much as we do.
Well, that's another problem. Whether you nationalize or not nationalize, the thieves are thieves. so you don't allow that. Yes. So two things that South Africa has to do is to identify which resources, particularly minerals, because we are rich in minerals, are subject of nationalization. You don't go and nationalize a motor manufacturer. No, it's not a strategic asset. But those you have to nationalize in order to finance education, health, and all these other things that need to. And then you need to look at South Africa has it's in a very lucky position. It has the minerals, but it also has significant pensions. 17 trillion in the private sector and 3 trillion in the public sector, 2.something, 5 in the public sector, 2.5 trillion. Now, development is driven by pension money. South Africa has that pension money. But what we are doing is to give this money to fund managers who are outside the country and inside the country. And we go and borrow this money that is ours from those fund managers instead of going directly. And that process has to be facilitated by a restructured reserve bank. Restructured in terms of its orientation to facilitate development. That has to be that way. Otherwise, it cannot happen.
Why is that point political, the restructuring of the Reserve Bank?
It's not political, it's economics. And in terms of economics, the Reserve Bank of the US just poured money during COVID. That's what they do all the time. All the reserve banks are used for a development agenda. Ours is saying price stability. Now, what price stability when you have inflation? Yes, lower, but you have such high unemployment. What do you do in that kind of situation? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't yield a result. You are perpetuating a situation of high levels of unemployment in an attempt to preserve price stability. And when you look at all these, and you look at real growth has been below the rate of inflation.
Yes.
So it may well mean that the rate of inflation is the one that has caused declining growth.
Yes.
And that's the question we have to ask.
Yes.
That if for all this period, only in 4 or so quarters, real growth, or in the period of 2002 to 2008, real growth was above the rate of inflation, real inflation rates.
Yes.
Why are we clinging to this inflation targeting thing?
Yes, as we do now.
Yes, we do now.
Dr. Lehohla, we're out of time. I knew that it was going to be fascinating. Last question for you.
Yes.
When you're looking at the South African political system as it stands now, and you read a lot of polls that talk about, that kind of predicts where ANC will end up, and talks of coalition, everyone is speculating. How do you see the future of South Africa, but in a short term as it relates to the national elections this year?
You know, I called for a postponement of the elections.
I know you did.
Yes.
Yes.
Because if you go and look at the Indulamete scenarios, which have been proven again and again to have shown that we have followed a Gwara scenario, that is a nation that is demoralized. In the revised scenarios that we just released this year, last year in November, we are actually entering a vulture culture. Now, the question is, will the elections resolve both the Gwara that we are exiting and going even deeper into a vulture culture? My answer is no, it will not. And in fact, it will be facilitated by the coalitions. South Africa needs to pause and say, what does it require to be as a nation? And then once that has been done, then the jockeys, which are the politicians, can come and flaunt their stuff, and then we can say which one has the possibility of delivering that.
Yes.
So at the rate at which we are going,
Yes.
that vulture culture is absolutely certain.
Yes.
And that vulture culture is dog eat dog.
Wow. We'll leave it at that. Dr. Lehohla, thank you very much.
Thank you
Thanks
very
for your
much.
time, sir.
Thank you very much.
That was Dr. Pali Lehohla. Very fascinating man indeed. If you want to follow his writings and the scenarios that he was talking about, please, his articles are available everywhere on the net. Just Google him. You'll have, we'll post his name down on the link. Thank you for joining us. Remember, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is always interested in you. This episode will be available on Spotify, YouTube, and join us on all our social media networks. Until next time.